We've had weeks, a record breaker of public hearings. Nearly 1,000 people came out to Calgary City Hall in person to express their feelings on the blanket rezoning plan. Didn't matter. Calgary's mayor and city council voted yesterday 9-6 to impose the blanket rezoning on the city. Even though 70% of those who presented in person opposed the rezoning, 90% of the thousands of submissions that were put in from citizens opposed the rezoning. And the council, they never campaigned on rezoning. It didn't matter. They don't care what citizens think. And the snide attitudes of some of those council members made it pretty clear. Hurrah, if you're a Calgarian, you know who I'm talking about. He's a special piece of work. But they got a few other clowns on there worthy of your derision as well. In a sense, what Mayor Gondek and her supporters on city council said to Calgarians as well. What are you going to do about it? It's a valid question. What can citizens do about it? I mean, clearly the mayor and council don't care what people think between elections, and they have no fear, of being able to pursue their own personal agendas, even if they don't match the wishes of the citizens who put them there in the first place. That's why I support having citizens-initiated recall and referendum legislation. And citizens should have their means to at least hold elected officials accountable between elections. I mean, there's a case to be made against having such election legislation. They say we can remove elected officials every few years in a general election, and we should just live with our choice for the duration of their term, come hell or high water. It's fair enough and debatable, I guess. What isn't debatable, though, is that Alberta's current legislation for recall and citizens-initiated referendum is utterly worthless. It was purposely crafted by the Kenney government to be unworkable. Kenney needed to fulfill a campaign promise, but he didn't really want to arm citizens with the power to remove elected officials. So when they passed the Recall Act in 2022, his government ensured that the bars set to invoke a recall were set impossibly high. So there was a recent effort to recall Calgary Mayor Jyoti Gondek, and it demonstrated how useless the legislation is. I mean, polls have indicated Gondek is the least popular mayor in Calgary's history. Despite that, though, a recall effort initiated by Calgarian Land in Johnston barely managed to get over 10% of the required citizens to start the recall process going. And there was hundreds of volunteers working around the city to do it. On top of that, even if Johnston's petition had somehow reached the ridiculously high 514,000 signatures required, which is more than people voted in the entire election, by the way, a technicality found by City of Calgary bureaucrats rendered the signatures of the petition to be apparently 100% invalid. The language of the act is confusing and offers all sorts of hurdles on top of simply getting the signatures. So apparently there wasn't a little notice that was attached to the sheets of the petition. So those 69,000 signatures were 100% invalid, according to city bureaucrats. What a joke. So, even if you'd lowered it, I don't think they'd gotten enough to effectively recall somebody. It should be a last resort, but we got to have that resort in our tool belt to hold these politicians accountable. Many other democratic jurisdictions have effective recall legislation. We don't need to reinvent the wheel to find a bar that's acceptable. Alberta's referendum legislation is just as useless as the recall rules, by the way. The bar has been set ridiculously high. Nobody's going to manage to invoke one, and it's not binding on the government, even if a referendum was, brought about by a citizen. So this mess now lands on Premier Danielle Smith's lap to either fix it or ignore it. Now, Smith appears to be on a mission to make municipal councils accountable, and that's great. The problem is, though, Premier Smith wants them to be accountable to her government rather than directly to citizens. I mean, do we really need to make it easier for the provincial government to fire municipal officials or shoot down municipal bylaws? I mean, they can already do those things if they have to. It's just not easy. Wouldn't it make more sense just to empower citizens to fire these guys and initiate plebiscites to deal with bad bylaws? I mean, again, with a reasonable bar set. But no government wants to empower citizens to fire elected officials because they don't want to see that power potentially turned against themselves. So they'll pay lip service to policies like recall and referenda, but they have no interest in actually giving citizens the real ability to do that. But I hold some optimism. Danielle Smith has been different than most of the political leaders we've seen in the last couple of decades. She's not afraid to swim upstream or rock the boat. And if any premier might show the courage to fix Alberta's rotten recall and referendum legislation, it would be her. She's going to have to be encouraged, though. I mean, the UCP government already has a lot of irons in the fire. So citizens need to quit wasting time trying to pressure Calgary's mayor and city council. Gondek and her gang clearly don't care what you think. Energy needs to be directed at having the provincial government amend Alberta's terrible recall and referendum legislation. If 1,000 people can come out to City Hall in Calgary to talk about something, if 70,000 can sign a petition to recall a mayor, surely a few thousand of you can contact your MLAs and say, hey, fix that legislation. I mean, citizens need to show they're serious and want to have that, they got to get out and fire these guys when the real election comes along. But along the way, we can fix this legislation. Alberta's going to be holding municipal elections next year, and we're notoriously apathetic at voting time. Why should elected officials care what citizens think between elections if citizens don't even bother themselves to vote at election time? We do have the democratic tools at our disposal, guys. We can affect the change, but we haven't been using them effectively. If Calgary and Edmonton city councils both got wiped out in next year's election, you can rest assured the provincial government's going to suddenly feel inspired to keep the rest of us happy. It's up to us, guys. It always was, and it always will be, and it is right now.